Welcome to What the Paper Said, in which I, Patrick Crozier, skim through the Times from 100 years ago, read some of the articles and comment on the ones I find interesting. In this episode, the week ending the 17th of February 1924, the Times drives a car. But first, some of the other items that have caught my attention this week. There is a threat of a dock strike. Talks are taking place. For those of us of a certain age, a phrase like that immediately takes us back to the 1970s when talks were forever taking place. Miners, power workers, steel workers, car workers, railwaymen, firemen, binmen, you name it. ACAS, the social contract, beer and sandwiches at number 10. It looks like the Conservative/Unionist Party have learnt from their humiliating election defeat and are about to drop protectionism as a policy. Talking of the Conservatives, nowadays when a party leader loses an election, he is expected to resign, and if he drags his feet, he will be removed. Not so in the 1920s. Stanley Baldwin, architect of the Conservative/Unionist defeat, has been re-elected leader. Re-elected by whom, I hear you ask? By backbench MPs. On a couple of occasions I have mentioned the Rhineland separatist movement in Germany. Led by chancers, staffed by criminals, backed by the French. It would appear that the movement is falling apart and that scores are being settled. On Thursday the 14th, the Times published this dispatch from Pirmessens. The population of this little manufacturing town, situated on a spur of the picturesque southern Palatinate hills, have taken a terrible vengeance on the separatists who have terrorised them for 3 months. Last night the last stronghold of the separatists was stormed by the infuriated workers, who, after receiving great provocation, gave little quarter. 15 separatists lie dead in the town mortuary. The bodies of the dead separatists bear terrible evidence of the fury with which the people avenged their sufferings, which had culminated in the intensified reign of terror of the last few weeks. Some bodies are almost unrecognisable, being covered with hacks and burns, that of Schwab in particular, the detested dictator of Pirmessens, being horribly mutilated. This is a disaster for the French. Not only has no one been taken in by their deceptions, but they have failed to make it stick, despite most of the area in question being under their occupation. It makes them look both untrustworthy and weak. It also provides a shot in the arm for German nationalism. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that the UK was looking to recognise the Soviet Union. Well, it would appear they have started a trend, with Austria following suit. There have been a number of articles this week on the subject of pub closing time in London. For some reason, the Times thinks all pubs should close at the same time. Generally speaking, in central London, closing time is 11 p.m, and outside 10 p.m. In Thursday's edition, the Times reported on the annual general meeting of the South Metropolitan Gas Company. The most remarkable thing about that, to me at least, was that there was a South Metropolitan Gas Company. By the 1970s, gas was state-owned. It was privatised in the 1980s, but heavily regulated. I'm guessing that regulation was much lower and possibly non-existent in the 1920s. It would be nice to think, being a libertarian, that gas and other utilities could be privately owned without a huge amount of regulation creating perverse incentives and stifling enterprise. But how else could they be stopped from putting up their prices? In the 1920s, of course, if the gas companies like the South Metropolitan put up their prices, customers would simply revert to using coal. But by the 1970s, this was no longer an option. In the case of lighting, gas was already making way for electricity. In his speech, the President, I kid you not, had this to say. Another difficulty we experience is that of having to keep enormous stocks of coal to tide us over interruptions in supplies by reason of trade disputes. Coal which has been stored never gives us such good results as freshly wrought, and there is in addition the double cost of handling. The public, of course, pays for this insurance of its fuel supply, but the cost is considerable, and it would largely disappear if the coal industry would be carried on in an atmosphere of contentment instead of unrest. The Teapot Dome scandal is still going on in the US. This is where the Secretary of the Interior sold off oil drilling rights to a field that was reserved for use in wartime. As if to hammer home the point, while giving evidence to the investigating committee, the former Treasury Secretary, William McAdoo, had this to say: "In any future war, victory would rest with the country having the largest supply of oil." Prophetic stuff. Both Japan and Germany were desperately short of oil in the Second World War. The YouTuber Tick, link on the end screen, even claims it was the main reason Germany lost. The Times chips in with this observation about McAdoo's prospects of becoming the Democrat presidential candidate. "Popular prejudice against any man who has rendered services in any capacity to a large business corporation, and particularly as matters stand to oil interests, will be too strong to allow the Democrats to choose him." Spoiler alert, they were right. The actual president, Calvin Coolidge, made a speech in New York this week, reported in the Times on Thursday, as part of his campaign for election this year. Coolidge, President of the United States from 1923 to 1929, is known to history, insofar as he is known at all, as Silent Cal. He was not a great talker. So I was curious to see what he said when he had no choice but to talk. I have to say it's a bit of a struggle. He talks about the depression in agriculture. He talks about balancing the books. He talks about the soldiers' bonus bill, whatever that may be. He waffles vaguely about America's obligations to Europe. I must admit I didn't think it had any. He does not talk about prohibition, the Ku Klux Klan, or perhaps less surprisingly, the looming mountain of unrepayable debt that will, along with subsequent economic policies, send America into depression for a decade and a half. And that's about it. I saw this ad in Thursday's edition. "Enjoy the pleasures of the table, and correct errors of diet by always drinking Vichy Celestin, the French natural mineral water. Secures and maintains a healthy action of the liver." You have to feel sorry for them. It wasn't their fault that the collaborationist regime would base itself in Vichy and make their product, I assume, unsaleable. Or at least unsaleable under that name. In this country, at least. As I was preparing this podcast, in real life one of the big stories involved an acid, well actually alkali attack. Just in case you thought this was exclusive to our modern world, this is from Thursday the 14th. After being 5 weeks in hospital, Arthur William Thompson, an omnibus inspector, attended at the Westminster Police Court yesterday to give evidence against Edith Louise Bassett, alias Mabel Young, 31 of Fentimore Road, Lambeth, on the charge of throwing corrosive acid in his face in the vestibule of the court with intent to do grievous bodily harm. I found this in a letter from a Frederick Mead, magistrate, published on Wednesday the 13th of February. "The misery of overcrowding can hardly be exaggerated, and it naturally evokes universal sympathy with the victims, but there are some who, never having been familiar with better conditions, feel no discontent with their lot." I wonder if Mr. Mead, who feels that the answer to overcrowding is to punish anyone indulging in it, has really thought about what he is saying. Had it, for instance, occurred to him that the overcrowders, to use the contemporary term, are in the right? Maybe that is what is best for them. Maybe that marginal shilling would be better spent on food, for instance, than space. And then there is the question of a legal definition of overcrowding. As it happens, Mead furnishes us with one. "Taking as a sample the bylaws made by the City Council of Westminster, we find that every person above the age of 10 must have at least 300 cubic feet in which to sleep, and there need be only 200 cubic feet for a child under that age." And we get into the usual problem with numbers. Why 300? Why not 301 or 299? I haven't mentioned this before, but the Times has a weekly car column in which it reviews the latest models. So what are they looking at this week? The 4-seated all-weather 12-horsepower Austin is called the Harley model, presumably because it has been specially designed for doctors' use. So how does it look? Does it set the pulse racing? The body is nicely turned out. This is still the age of separate bodies and chassis. One manufacturer would sell you the bits that make you go, and another would build a body on top of it. But I don't think that's the case with this particular model. It's more that no one cares. What sort of engine does it have? The Austin engine is a 4-cylinder of 72 and 120mm bore and stroke, or 1660cc capacity. Note the use of metric. And how much power? It is rated by Treasury at 12.8 horsepower, but is said to give 20 on the brake at 2000 RPM. So why the discrepancy? According to Wikipedia, the Treasury is not measuring power at all. It is estimating power based on the size and number of cylinders. For comparison, almost no modern car has less than 80 horsepower. So how does it go? Does it go? Amersham Hill was taken on second with a minimum speed of 17 miles an hour. What about handling? The clutch action was sufficiently light. And suspension? Of the springing I have no complaint. And equipment? The jack is kept under the bonnet, and there is a container for the roll handling the small tools on the inner side of the dash. Build quality? I should not say that an owner would ever be troubled with overheating. And the interior? All 4 windows are raised or lowered by turning handles. How much does it cost? The price is £525. Which is about 100 ounces of gold. Even applying the Crozier fudge factor, this still gives us £80,000. Anything else you want to tell us? The front bearing is rubber lined. The gland on the pump is adjustable. Aft of the timing on the same side is the magneto, which is driven by chain. Both cylinder head and block are detachable. A breather in each chamber permits a certain amount of automatic lubrication. You just don't get that from modern car shows. There is a serious point here. Cars in the 1920s need constant attention, and even then are likely to break down. Key questions for any owner is, will I be able to maintain it, and will I be able to fix it? Anyway, that's all for this week. I believe at this point I'm supposed to say something about liking and subscribing, if you are logged in that is. In the meantime, I aim to have something up next week, but I promise nothing.